Welcome to Ask the Expert North Texas here on KRLD. I'm David Rancken.
And I'm Kristin Diaz. And joining us this afternoon, we have our radar tech self-driving car expert, Dr. Markel, who happens to also be the author of Radar for Fully Autonomous Driving and the CEO of Spartan Radar. And this is just a super cool guest to have on our show today, because a lot of you guys, you might be thinking that the self-driving cars are still a world of the Jetsons, that it's still something of the future. And we got to say, it is right here in the present. It is happening right now. We've talked a lot about how companies are using it, how the new technologies are being implemented in our day-to-day cars. So what are some of the myths and some of the facts when it comes to self-driving vehicles? Dr. Markel, thanks so much for joining us and for the time today.
Hi, Kristin. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
So let's talk about the self-driving technology. It's becoming more and more common. This is just what's the evolution and where are we going with this in the future?
So that's a great question. Where we're ultimately going is we're going to get to the point where vehicles can take that burden of driving off of us for some portion of the drive, whether it's the entirety of the drive or at least some portion of it. And when you think about that, that offers two primary benefits. One is it gives us our time back, right? How much time do we spend commuting? How much time do we spend in the car having to drive instead of doing things that we really want to do, whether it's engaging in a deep conversation that takes a lot of your conversation, or checking your emails, or discussing things on the phone that really require the concentration that you can't really give because you have to be operating this vehicle. But the other thing it provides, and this is extremely important as well, is it provides an aspect of safety. And when we think about it, what we don't hear a lot on the news are about traffic accidents, right? When there's a self-driving car accident, we hear about that. And of course, when there's an airplane accident, we hear about that a lot because those are very rare and those become newsworthy. But unfortunately, what happens, Kristin, is that in the United States of America, we lose about 43,000 people every year due to traffic accidents. And most of those accidents are human error. So there's a big safety aspect of this as well. And by the way, that 43,000, just to put that in perspective, that's basically the same number that we lose due to breast cancer.
The issue, though, of course, with self-driving cars is it's kind of twofold. One, there are people that like to have the control. They like to be able to drive their own cars, and they basically trust themselves. That's the first thing. And then the second one is there's still a lot that we don't know, a lot that the consumers don't know about self-driving cars.
That's true. And I think that when you think about how this is going to roll out ultimately to the public, there's two top-level models that this will be. One is what we call the robo-taxis, and that's what one of my former companies, Waymo, is doing. Cruise, you've heard about them in the news in a little bit of a negative light recently. But that's the one where it's sort of like an Uber, right? Where you hail the car on an app on your phone. It comes, picks you up, you sit in the back seat, and then it takes you where you want to go. And that's very useful for some applications. And if there's traffic, if you don't want to park, if you maybe have a cocktail or two, that's a really useful capability there. It's basically the robotaxi one. But you're right, David, that the idea of like wanting to be able to drive your car some is important too. And when we think about it, really to make the big penetration into the public and really take a bite out of those 43,000 lives lost every year, this has to be not just in the robo-taxis, but this has to be in vehicles that we'll ultimately own, because we might need to drive it for a while. And there's rural areas. I live in Allen, and just a little bit north of that is a place called Melissa, and it's like really, really small. And to get a robo-taxi up there is probably going to be quite a ways away. So we'll need to be able to drive on those areas, especially in rural areas as well. The other thing is, like, it's just not practical to have a robo-taxi pick you up everywhere. So there's a grocery store about a mile from my house, and I like ice cream. And as we all know, it gets very hot in Dallas in the summer. And if I go to the grocery store to pick up ice cream and I'm waiting for a ride-hailing app to pick me up, whether it's an Uber or a driverless something, and I'm standing outside, my ice cream's going to melt, and no one wants that. So there's just not every application is suitable for the robo-taxis.
I think we've seen the parallel parking example that you brought up, the cars doing the parallel parking.
Mm-hmm.
I saw last year, for the first time, a girlfriend of mine has a Tesla, and she called her car up to the curb, and it scared the bejesus out of me because I see this car driving by itself, and I'm like, how does it know? How does it know? What is the research gathering process like? Because when we talk about someone wanting the control because of human instinct, for example, something popping out in the road and being able to brake on time and trusting your instinct versus trusting sensors or radar. What is that development like right now? How strong is it? How far are we from, or how close are we from human instinct to calculated instinct?
Right. So when we think about the self-driving, we often think of an architecture that's composed of sensing, and that's the things like where am I and what's around me. Then we think about things like decision making, like what should I do? What are they going to do? How should I get to where I'm trying to go? And then there's the actual driving part, which is the actuation of accelerators and brakes and steering wheels and horns and lights and windshield wipers and all those sorts of things. So but I think what your question is like on the sensing side, which is where a lot of really cool technology development is going on right now. My company, Spartan Radar, is making some really exciting software to make basically radars better. There are a lot of other folks working in this area as well to make the sensing part better. But those sensors actually work at incredible speeds. We will operate and provide data often at quicker than a tenth of a second. Whereas we think of like the ability for a human to see and start to react as maybe like 500 to 700 milliseconds, basically, 5x to 7x times that. So on the sensing side, that's typically something that we can do actually faster than a human. The issues sometimes get into on the decision making part is like, are we making the right decisions? And I think you've seen in some of the robotaxi situations recently, they don't make unsafe decisions, but sometimes they're unable to make a decision and they get stuck. And that's what causes a lot of problems in traffic. We've seen that a lot in Northern California and San Francisco, where a car is not going to take an unsafe action, but it's can't figure out what to do, and it just won't take any action and ends up getting stuck.
Let's talk about the fact that in the future, when these are more common, I kind of wonder, is this similar to what pilots do on long flights? Most of the flights done by autopilot. They're responsible for takeoff and landing. Is that something that we're going to see in the future, that if we're on a long car trip, that the autopilots, the self-driving part of the car, will take over for most of the freeway driving, and we'll just have to get it started and get it parked?
Absolutely. And I think actually that's the most likely way we'll see the autonomous capability really roll out to people, is to give them the capabilities to do this on the freeways. Freeways are actually easier to drive in. And why are they easier? Because they have to be, because people are going fast and people get distracted and so forth. So you need, well marked lanes, long opportunities to make turns, the limited ingress and egress. So I think you'll see this roll out on the freeways first, and then start getting into some of the connectors and other things. And we'll have to see ultimately when we get to that point for the passenger car autonomy, which is what we're talking about, a car that we'll own and we'll buy and we'll drive part of the time, and they'll drive part of the time, or the car will drive part of the time. How much into the real dense urban, or rural situations the self-driving actually takes us? In my opinion, it might never get there for everything. We might still need to drive sometimes, especially if it's a brand new area, or it's uncharted, or you're driving on, if you have a large property, you're just driving around that, right? The need to be self-driving there is not really there, and the cost to put that capability in there is probably going to be prohibitive for many people. So we need to make sure that the technology is affordable, and by making it affordable, then we can get it to the most people out there, so that they can be safe and get the benefit of their time back. And to do that, we're probably going to draw the line somewhere at some type of road and say, like, okay, below this you take over, and above this we'll take over. But the majority of the miles driven are on freeways anyway. The majority of the time driven is on freeways. So I think that'd be a good start and be a good product for people today.
We talk about some of the advancement hurdles that still need to be made, as this is still an evolving technology. We talk about some of the hurdles of just people trusting this technology. Some of the hurdles might be the cost, as you mentioned, putting these into vehicles. Are there any legal hurdles right now that are preventing the evolution of this technology?
So yes, in the United States, each state is different. Each state has their own regulatory authorities and regulations. That's why you don't see self-driving capability or fully autonomous capability from at least the robotaxi side across all the states, because some are more favorable for that, some are less favorable. Arizona was very favorable for that. That's why a lot of the early testing was there. Texas is pretty supportive of that, so that's why you see things going on in Texas as well. California's been supportive, then but they're always a little bit of like, are they, is the political climate going to change? And is that support still going to be there? There's an interesting law that was on the books recently, or that was up for debate recently in California about kind of preventing it and slowing the growth of that. So, but Chris, it's very much state by state. And I think as we continue to push the technology and continue to push not only the safety, but the operational design domains, the type of areas where we can operate, you're going to see more and more states adopt that. When they see it's like, okay, this is applicable to our state now. Let's embrace this technology.
A lot of this also depends on the public's trust in self-driving cars. What kind of wow factor do you need? Because people, if they see a wow factor, that's going to instinctively build up a trust that they're going to want to be a part of this. What needs to be done to change that? Because the numbers do seem to be dropping.
Sorry, which numbers?
The numbers of people that say that they trust the possibility of self-driving cars.
I think that trust, by the way, or that lack of trust or that wariness, that's natural. Humans have a very much have a very strong tribe mentality, and that tribe mentality and the trust of things that are familiar and the kind of the intrinsic distrust of things that aren't familiar, that's what's kept us safe for a long, long time. And that applies to technology as well. You see people that are like, remember John Madden, the football coach, was like, deathly afraid of flying, and he had his big bus that took him everywhere.
So I think of Alexa. So many people were anti having Alexa in their house, and now, you got a fully smart home,
Right. Automobiles in the early days were not universally accepted. Remember that? Well, I don't remember. I heard of stories. This was like long before my time, but like they get a horse,
Yeah.
Way back when.
yeah, long before my time. Not all that old, but but I think what happens is when you think about that, and those are good things to think about, but the millions of miles that have been driven already, that's a big. So we talk about a wow factor. There's nothing that's going to be really flashy. I don't think that's going to like, oh look, and now it's safe. It's the accumulation of millions and millions of miles on for real roads, and then most of the major players in this space are doing billions of miles, billions with a B miles in simulation as well, to really be able to test cases and change the position of something just ever so slightly and try a case where the guy's moving just a little bit faster or a little bit slower and evaluate their system and push it to the point where we expose these breakpoints. I think it's also important when we think about the distrust of the technology is to look at like, what is the alternative we're comparing to? Okay, we don't really get a choice to compare it to a situation where there's no accidents on the road, right? We have to compare it to the way humans drive today. We've already discussed that we lose, the same number of lives on the road as we do due to breast cancer. So when you compare it to that, you think of the alternative, then I think you're going to start seeing more and more people, when it's available to them, choose to adopt that technology. As more and more people choose to adopt it, people see more and more in their tribe that are doing that, and then it becomes like once they take their first ride. And I'll tell you, I've ridden numerous times in self-driving cars. If there was one word I could use to describe it, it would be boring. Because it's not what you think I was going to say, but it really is. Because what are you doing?
Does it feel like a Disney ride? Like you're in the scene and just takes you.
Well, so yeah, you're think about it in your back of an Uber, right? What's it like being in the back of an Uber, but you don't get to talk to the driver. It's like the car's driving you around, and it gets you where you want to go, and then you get out. It's not like a Disney ride where like, like, oh, and you might go, it might turn into a roller coaster, all of a sudden you go down a big scary, hill or something like
Even
that.
that has more thrills. Yeah.
Now that's more thrills, but that's not
Sure.
that's not my thing. I don't really like roller coasters, but that's not the way it is. It's very boring. Just like what do you want out of a good airplane ride? You want it to be boring.
Yeah.
So,
Yes,
and I think,
absolutely.
and my experiences on the rides that I've taken is it's boring, which is what you want. And as more people realize, like, okay, this is not anything to be afraid of, and not anything to be that's going to be, oh, it's a lot different than sitting in the back of an Uber, you'll see increased adoption.
Interesting.
Kind of like the Johnny Cab in the movie Total Recall.
Yes, yes. Except he talked to you, right? He turned around and talked to you. So
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Matt Markel. We just really appreciate your time and your insight on this, and just really enjoyed the conversation today. We appreciate it.
absolutely. Thank you, Kristin. Thank you, David, so much. This has been a pleasure.